Welcome to Spirit School. I'm your mentor, Danielle Sarank, also known as the Squamish Medium. In this podcast, I share honestly all I have learned about the mediumship and spiritual development journey. My intention is to normalize these conversations, to make way for a more confident, clear, and connected wave of lightworkers, serving the world of spirit with an open and joyful soul. Welcome again to Spirit School. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Spirit School. I am very excited to bring you a guest on this episode. Can you believe it? It has been a minute since we have had a guest, but I'm bringing you today one of my dear, dear friends, one of my nearest and dearest, Maxine friend. How are you doing today, Maxine?
I'm very excited to be here. I'm doing fabulous. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I'm so happy you're here. And I'm sure that this is just going to be the first of many spots for you on the podcast because there's so many things I want to talk about with you. But how I usually like to bring on a guest onto the Spirit School space is to just talk about how I found you and how we have become really close. And then I'll get you to describe yourself and your body of work and how you serve humanity and the spirit world. So it's quite interesting going back to when I first opened up my private practice in 2017 and I started serving the Squamish locals at my kitchen table. I cannot tell you how many people sat in front of me that had asked me, have you heard of Maxine Friend? Like I literally have been hearing about you my entire career. And so I started following you. And then in 2022, I reached out to you because I just seen some things that you were doing on Instagram. And I know that you followed me as well. And I reached out to you just to say, hey, Maxine, I want you to come on the podcast. I want to interview you. And I was very surprised that, here we are 2 years later almost. You're finally on the podcast. But what we ended up doing was meeting online and just choosing to be friends first. And we started this beautiful friendship with one another. And you're definitely my business bestie now. And what went from me hearing of Maxine Friend at my kitchen table, 8 years ago now, to being like in your inbox every single day and getting to talk to you and get to know like how magical you are. You've been in my peripheral my entire career. And so it's been a joy to get to know you over the years and get to see your magic at work. And so I'm very happy to finally have you on the podcast. So this is kind of the lead up to why I wanted to bring Maxine on because there's so many things that she wants to share. She's known in the world as a generational master coach, psychic medium, and metaphysical mentor. Her work speaks for itself. It truly does. And she's acclaimed and respected by thousands around the world as a compassionate, intuitive, and extremely gifted psychic medium, spiritual mentor, and master coach. So this is how I know of you. This is how your website speaks about you. But how does Maxine introduce herself to the world?
Well, thank you so much, Danielle. And I think it's absolutely amazing how we met. And I want to add also that the first time we met over video, there was an 8.8 magnitude earthquake captured live on video. So that really captures the magnitude of the energy that's being passed between us as two women that work in the intuitive space. I just wanted to mention that because it was such an extraordinary meeting for the first time. And you had to tell me to get under the table. I was in Mexico at the time and I was so enthralled about what was happening. I did not even think to go under the table or practice the safety measures. So thank you, Danielle.
I remember that so vividly. I think it was your most high perform reel at the time too, because I sent you a video clip of like the actual earthquake. I was like, Maxine, get under the table. Like, what is happening? And that was our first meeting.
I think it encapsulates the energy between us, which is very, very strong. And thank you so much for that amazing introduction. I really just look at myself as, a generational psychic medium channel. I would say my main ability is channeling, but I really take pride in my body of work of being of service. And working with people one-on-one is still my ultimate passion. It's still what I absolutely love, which you and I both know is not necessarily the most popular choice. A lot of people expand into different things, but it's still by far my favorite thing to do. And I've been working with clients now for about 16 years. And it's just a privilege. It's a privilege to see clients grow and expand And I have some different digitized offerings and live courses as well, but I still prefer the one on one over everything else. So I'm a little old school that way. And yeah, so I'm a generational psychic. It runs back. We don't know how many generations in our family. My sister is also a psychic medium. And so it does run our family. And I just prefer to just be of service in the greatest way using the highest level of ethics and also empowering people to access their own energetic ecosystem.
Yeah, I love that, and you are an incredibly accurate psychic, so I'm not surprised to hear that people come back year after year after year, and you heard her say it too. She has been doing this for 16 years. That's quite some longevity in this craft, don't you think?
Yeah, it's a long time. Yeah, it's definitely the work. I've worked in different industries over the years, and this is definitely by far my greatest passion, my greatest sense of purpose is to be able to channel spirit and just to serve. So it's a
Yeah. I love that, and I love hearing that you still love the one-on-one work. I know for me personally, I love the teaching, I love the group. I know me and Maxine always laugh at how different we are and how vastly different our lives are, and how we are still so similar with, like, our ethics and the integrity in this practice, like, how we show up. There's a lot of similarities there as well, but, um one thing I wanted to ask you about, there's so much because I wanna talk about ethics with you. I wanna talk about a whole bunch of different things that I just look up to you for, and one of them is that lifestyle because I know for us, like, it was harder to initiate that friendship and keep things going because I have, like, little kids, and my life is absolutely nuts, and it's hard to schedule things in and plan things in and keep things going, but for you, you have created like, such a beautiful lifestyle for yourself that really supports your spirit work. Like, it supports your spirit work. I feel like I'm having to sometimes, like, fit my spirit work into my life because my life is so crazy, and you have built a life around your spirit work, and I know that that's something that you're passionate about helping others through, so, like, where did that passion come from, and how did you get to a point where you could, like, literally travel anywhere and, land anywhere and still have your work flourishing?
That's a really good question. I started working as a remote worker way before the pandemic. I started working remotely in 2017. So that gave me more freedom to move around. As long as I had a good internet connection, I was able to travel. Traveling is a huge passion of mine. I've been basically living abroad for the last 2.5 years, but I travel as well within living abroad. So traveling is a huge piece. And I also came to realize that the work that I do is not full time. If you're going to be serving clients on a full time basis, many psychics and mediums and people in this craft will tell you that you can't do it 8 hours a day of pure channeling or, serving in mediumship. It's just an impossibility. So it ended up being that I decided to, do a bit of lifestyle design around my practice. I didn't want to do anything else. Wanted to continue to serve clients and travel the world. So I managed to, as you said so eloquently, build a practice and build a life around that practice. So be able to get downtime, be able to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to see the sunrise and, be able to travel and see different parts of the world, but also honor my energy, honor, the vitality or the quality of those channeled sessions by not working full time, working just a few days a week, traveling the world. But it was something that was led prior, way before the pandemic, before it was trendy. And I became inspired by a very old book now by Tim Ferriss. The 4 Hour Work Week was kind of the impetus for this lifestyle and opening my eyes that it doesn't have to be cookie cutter 9 to 5, that we can, build a life of our dreams. And so that has been something I'm constantly working on and looking to improve upon in different sectors of my life. So.
Yeah. I mean, I get to talk to you when you're traveling, and I always make comment. I'm like, "I like travel, Maxine." It's just, you seem to really replenish I personally get really exhausted traveling, like airports, finding my passport, always worrying about the next thing. I'm a Virgo, so like the time is always there. And I get a little bit stressed traveling, but you always feel like really replenished. I know you just went on your first cruise, which you really loved. And it was just so serene to hear your vibration and hear you like recover in that way. So that's one way that you've definitely inspired me is I'm not able to travel as much, but I definitely have learned from you that I don't have to be doing this, like, all the time, like, in it, and when I'm off and I'm out and I'm doing things, like, really enjoying it and being really present so that it makes that difference. As you know, I just went to New Zealand with kids, it's not really a replenishing trip per se, but I try to make, like, every paddle replenishing or every nature walk as replenishing as possible and hopefully get out travel a little bit more eventually as well, but that's one thing that I know that you eventually will be mentoring more people on is, like, creating lifestyles for themselves that work. So, is that something that you're really passionate about, helping others with?
Absolutely. Lifestyle design is a huge piece, along with being able to empower people in terms of their own spiritual and intuitive abilities, but they play very much off each other. So the kind of life we curate for ourselves also creates a spiritual practice, lifestyle design and how we want to build purpose into our lives. And that shifts over the ages, over the course of our experiences in this life. So that's why we're seeing, I think the average person now changes careers every 4 years. So that's a lot of shifts and a lot of pivots for people. And to be able to guide them through that and to help them empower them to make those decisions that they already know what to do, but it's just about getting that level of encouragement to take those steps, which can be very brave. If you're leaving a secure, well paying job to go out into business for yourself or whatever the endeavor is. So that is a huge passion around lifestyle design and also kind of living not the typical cookie cutter life. I can fit my possessions into 3 suitcases, and I joke that one of those suitcases is for my dog, and being able to just come and go as I please and not, have a lot of material objects, but be very rich in experiences or be very rich in the deliberate design of that life.
Yeah, I love that, and I wanna go on to boundaries because one of the things I also look up to you for is how incredibly boundaried you are because to create a lifestyle like that in the healing arts especially where, there's a lot of pulling from everywhere, it's like a lot of people need help and a lot of people want service, and with the pandemic and the uncertainty of the world, that only amplified over these past few years, and I'm really happy I had some firm boundaries before the pandemic went in, and I know that you did too. But I wanna talk about that, but before we go there, I'm curious, and I actually don't know this, but when you were making this shift to being like a full-time light worker and choosing not to work the 8 hours and just working a few days a week and, charging accordingly to be able to do this work, well at the level of accuracy that you have. Um, what were the people around you thinking? Did you have to change your relationships to be able to move into this direction? Or were you just like, this is where I'm going, follow along or hop off? What was that like for you?
Sure. Absolutely not. It was a very long evolution. So going back to 2016, I had a 2-year waiting list. I was not charging, appropriately for my services. I was still pretty green. I was only a couple of years in and I wanted to serve and I was a pleaser, someone who wanted to just take care. So it would be very easy for a client to bully me into taking on a fifth client for the day. I mean, we're talking, I was working very long hours. And it was a very dramatic experience that ended up shaping and changing that direction. And in fact, I had a client, this is back when I had clients at my house. I actually had clients visit my house for 10 years prior to working remotely. And I had a woman come to my house, and right away, her mother, who had just crossed over, came in and she explained to me that she was a nurse. And she started lecturing me how dangerous it was, the level that I was working. And she actually started yelling for me to stop. And so as I'm listening to this telepathically, I started to cry in front of my client, which, is not professional, but I was just so burnt out and so exhausted and just running off of fumes. And so I reiterated to my client what her mother said and said, yes, she is a nurse and she would lecture you. And so with that, I reimbursed my client and I ended up completely changing out my schedule. And it took about 2 years to recover from the burnout itself. So it took a very severe experience in order for me to change my ways. I was a workaholic. I was from the tech startup industry. I worked in business development. I didn't know how to slow down. I didn't know that spiritual work was different than startup work. So I just kept going the way I knew to keep going. And so I had to learn the hard way. So, in essence, that's what happened. And after that, there was a lot of self care. I took 2 weeks off after that experience. And I was basically told by my spiritual team that if you keep this up, that we will actually cut off your abilities
Mm.
because it's just not safe for you to channel at such a low frequency. So that also made me realize that I am myself the channel for the energy coming in, and that we have a responsibility to remain the integrity of that channel.
Yeah.
So that was a huge piece for me to make changes. But those changes didn't miraculously come on their own. They came with tough lessons and experiences, just like I think we all endeavor in this life.
Yeah, beautiful answer, and I appreciate that, and, burnout's on my list of things and self-care. You're hitting all the things I wanna talk about because,
Mhm.
you've helped me a lot this year through my burnout. I think it took me a long time to realize, like, my burnout. I'm like, "Oh, I'll just take the weekend off." You're like, "Didn't you need more than a weekend, honey?" And you're always so inspirational in sharing about how you move through it, and I'm wondering if you can help our audience identify for themselves, like, when are you rubbing up against that burnout? Like, when are you kind of crossing that threat? Like, what are some of the signs people should look for with that?
Uh, well, one of the big signs is if you're irritated by one more email, one more text, or if someone interrupts you, or you just feel resentful of your time being taken away. These are all symptoms. If you can't sleep because you have so much going on and you can't come in for a landing, if you are missing out on your spiritual practice, you can't meditate because you're too distracted, you're not taking enough time for yourself in nature. So, getting the rest and the recuperation. So, when our bodies get too much positive charge, whether that be by, 5G, the internet, free radicals, children, cars honking, pets need to be walked, whatever it happens to be, we just have to, it's not, a lot of people think that recovering from burnout is a luxury, when in fact it's a necessity. It's integral to our health in this practice. And if you don't incorporate it, you're going to start experiencing symptoms that are very similar to PTSD. In fact, there's a TED talk that highlights that burnout has very similar symptoms as PTSD, which, these are not short recoveries. This isn't, oh, just take a weekend and you'll be better. A lot of times the more burnt out we are, the longer the recovery. So it's going to be very important to pay close attention if you're getting short tempered, impatient, resentful of people taking your time away. And also, if you're a people pleaser and you just don't have the ability to say no. So, one of my mantras is, when you say no to others, you say yes to yourself.
Very, very beautiful and 100% right. I'm definitely running through a bit of a checklist. I remember a couple years ago, I think my burnout was starting with all the fake accounts on Instagram. Like, my DM volume was so high because there was like 8 fake accounts, and that burnt me out in the social media space in a big way that I've still been trying to, like, recover from. And yeah, I definitely was not loving being in that space myself for a while, and it's taken me a while to kinda come back to it. So, you think, like, taking time away, condensed amounts of time away can help, saying no to people, anything else people can look for to recover or replenish themselves a little bit after a burnout experience?
Absolutely. If you can, and this could be a bit of a privileged solution, but if you can outsource, you can hire a house cleaner, hire childcare, hire a dog walker, Now, not everyone can afford this. Definitely tuned into that. But if you can, it can be the best money you've ever spent if there's that affordability to do so. And if not, perhaps you can trade off with the kids, down the street. If you can babysit their children in exchange for babysitting theirs. So there's different ways to go about it where we can, they say it takes a village, and it really does, and when we can embrace community, take care of each other, get ourselves involved in different community programs. But the more we can offload from ourselves on a more permanent basis, the better.
Yeah, definitely. I took that program, The Trauma of Money, a couple years ago, and one of the teachings in it that sticks out for me around the pricing was actually considering things like the rest you need to do the work that you need in that pricing, which was kind of eye-opening for me. Um, yeah, and it's definitely necessary. I know personally for me, I outsource my meal prep now for a couple nights a week. My dog walker lives with me. Thank God, my dad. So I get a lot of that extra help, and yeah, I think that that's going to be really helpful for people. So let me move on to the boundaries a little bit because that's also something that you are absolutely incredible at. And if you ever ran a program, I think bad boundaries for spirit workers, you would be a thought leader in this and you're so, so good at it. But you don't know what your boundaries are until they're crossed sometimes, right? Like you're like, oh, there's a boundary. I've rubbed up against one. So, is there anything you want to speak to around boundaries? It could be from your personal experience or from that higher level for people, because that is something that I think all mediums, all psychics, all healers, all people in the helping profession can definitely struggle with are some of these boundaries in which your boundary might not be my boundary. So, anything that you want to share on that would be wonderful.
Yes. Well, first off, I do teach boundaries. I have a foundation spiritual program. I haven't run it this year yet. I may run it again next year, but one of the modules is all about boundaries because it's such an integral piece if you are getting involved in your own spiritual practice. I would say, in order to learn about boundaries, you basically have to do everything wrong in order to learn or extract those lessons. And I can definitely say with a lot of humility that I have done all the things you're not supposed to do. I've taken calls from people crying in the middle of the night when I first started out, zero boundaries, squeezed in an extra client to accommodate somebody who was, begging me, all kinds of ways. We can even, be squeezed by our own family members or our children or society who just basically expects, especially women, to be everything in the world. And it's really about learning to say no. And one thing that is to note is that if you are working in any type of spiritual capacity, you want to be of service. And tapping into wanting to be of service, you want to please, serve, and hold space for people. But the greatest mistake you can make is not hold space for yourself because then, you're basically operating on empty. It's like, you're the cell phone with the last bar in the battery and you're just running off of fumes. And then it's almost makes it impossible to hold space or to hold the energy necessary for other people and to serve them appropriately. So it just became out of necessity that boundaries became such an integral part of my own personal practice. But it was by doing virtually everything wrong
Yeah.
in terms of, going like 12 hours without eating because you're working so long or, just ridiculous things that, most humans would not do. If you worked a regular 8-hour day, you would get breaks. You would be able to stop and use the restroom. When an appointment would be over, the person would leave. So I had all kinds of things with clients at home. They just wouldn't leave. They were having such a great time and they loved getting their tea leaves read and having the tea. And wow. And if they drove in from, I used to live in downtown Vancouver, and if they were driving in from Mission, well, they were ready to leave when the appointment was over. So they would hang around until the next person came in. So then I would go another couple hours with no food and no bathroom break. And this was with me very verbally saying, you need to leave. It just and it was
Yes.
a huge reason why I stopped seeing clients at my house. I actually really enjoyed opening my home for 10 years, but it became too much. People were no longer listening. They'd waited so long to see me, they didn't want to leave. They enjoy the space, they enjoy the tea, or they're late, parking downtown. So even with having strong boundaries and saying, listen, like I have another client coming, I need you to leave, they just would refuse.
Yeah.
So it just got to the point of, okay, I think it's time to reclaim back my personal space and start offering online. And to this day, there are clients that don't like that. I did lose some clients as a result of that, which I respect. A lot of people want the in person experience. It's just not something I'm prepared to offer and have not for many years.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I did them at my kitchen table for many, many years when I was practicing and when I started professionally, and I was kind of fine with it, but when everything went online in 2020, I was like, I didn't have to like clean my whole house before my session. I didn't realize how much inviting people into my personal space actually took up some capacity to do the work. And when I came back to 2022 and things started really opening up, I never went back. I never had another client in my home. Got spirit school now, but I agree. It's definitely harder to get people out the door. This is something I think people need to hear who are listening. And I have actually seen other mediums charge more for in person than online, almost for this reason, like the setup and like the tear down and like this. It's just different. It's easier to have boundaries with online for sure. So I agree. That's what I was kind of alluding to when I was asking the question. Is like sometimes we don't know what a boundary is until we're like, oh, there's a boundary, there's a new one, and sometimes that target moves a little bit too, right, for us? And one thing I would say to people who are listening around this is it's uncomfortable for everyone to put down a boundary. Like everyone is an equal playing field. It's usually going to be really sticky and uncomfortable at first, and then it becomes something that becomes more natural. And I even had a recent experience where a client was like really try to bump up in my schedule, like, sending me lots of messages, and the way that I respond is so boundaried, it's so matter of fact. It's like, I put you in exactly where I was able to see you. You're welcome to see. Like, once you put up boundaries, people really do start to respect them. But if you start kind of bending them and bleeding them energetically, other people will start bending and bleeding your boundaries a little bit too, right? Like, it's that reciprocal kind of energy exchange. So you're actually probably going to get a better response from people and attract a very different type of clientele when you're really firm and clear on the boundaries that you hold in your spiritual practice. Have you seen that?
Absolutely. And also, when you start to create boundaries around your spiritual practice, it bleeds into other areas of your life. You'll start to have boundaries with your family members, your friends. And, so not just in the workplace, but it ends up, setting boundaries for yourself, and you can, hold space for yourself in a more appropriate way and for other people. And the ones that do not honor your boundaries will leave your space. They will either go find someone else who is willing to have their boundaries violated, or maybe doesn't have any, or you're going to, like you said, end up with a much stronger spiritual practice because there's a vibrational match with the integrity of the energy. Someone's honoring you, you're honoring them, you're honoring the time, and you're honoring the space that you're co-creating together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have a lot. So do you have a lot of people watching us, like in the work that we do, and as icky and sticky as it might feel sometimes to put down a firm line and just say, this is how I need to operate to be able to do this work well, it really does give permission to the people who are watching and, looking up to us to be like, oh, it's okay to hold boundaries. And then it becomes more normal. And then it becomes less offensive when it's normalized. It's like, no, we actually need these for the sustainability of the craft, right? We really do. And I've done many of the same. I think maybe it's just part and part for the course of being a light worker, but fitting people in on a Wednesday night, or, me and my husband had an agreement when I was first kind of coming out publicly that like every other weekend I would do readings for 4 hours. And then that bleeded into 3 weekends. Sorry, I had to move people or people weren't available. And that really did affect my marriage quite negatively. But when I hold boundaries with my spirit work, it tells my family, like I'm prioritizing them as well. And then they seem more open to me being able to do this work when I have it kind of like scheduled in, knowing there's not very many surprises anymore, though they still come up with classes sometimes. But, we manage what we manage. But I agree, it really does impact all the different areas of life as well. Now let me ask you this, because I find personally for me that my boundaries, as I'm progressing along, as the work becomes a little bit more in demand, as I'm wearing multiple hats under my business, it's almost like I need more boundaries or they get closer and closer and closer to me. Have you found that in your practice? Or that could just be the season I'm in because I'm a little tired. That could be that as well.
Well, one of the most exciting things about, maturing in your spiritual practice is that you become extremely dialed in with your preferences and who you are as a person as you expand spiritually and just as a human being, and understanding what your timetable needs to look like to accommodate your family and to accommodate a personal life and your health and your well-being. And so, as you mature in this business or in this industry, it becomes easier. But you absolutely do have really strong, unpenetrable boundaries at this point because you've realized what works and what doesn't work. And that's personal to every single person listening. And it's not going to be the same for everybody, but a huge flag when working with anyone in the spiritual community or even the self-improvement community would be someone who does not have boundaries, because it's such an integral part of the teaching, not only for ourselves but for everybody moving forward in the space. So it's just going to be something that bleeds over into every aspect of your life and also your client's life.
Yeah, I agree with that. And that's something worth considering for people um, to listen into. I completely agree with that. And I think too, I have a lot of students, and I remember being at this point as well, where even if I wasn't feeling well or something came up, it's like, because I said I was going to be there, I have to be there. And that is my word. And I need to stay committed. And then when I started looking at it, but it's going to deplete me for days after, but I got to hold that word. And I started reframing the experience around, well, these people actually do deserve the best of me, not the most tired of me or just fitting people in because of the sake of word. And that's something that I've had to really mature into in my practice is if I have to move someone, it's not just because I don't feel like doing it. It's because I know based off of my energy and how I'm feeling, if people are going to get the best experience possible out of it. And even me confidently coming up to a session, say I have to move it and just giving that kind of reason, people respect that and people will actually value their session more knowing that you're doing it when you have the energetic capacity, when you are in your prime to do it. And I know that that's something that was really tricky for me, and I would forego my energy for days after to make that one thing work. Like, say I had to work all day, I had a client at 7 o'clock at night, but the kids woke up at 4 a.m. Guess what? At 7 o'clock at night, I thought I would have 10 hours sleep, but I had 4. Things shifted for me in that day, and I would literally bend over backwards to make that work because I said it was going to work and I knew people would look forward to it. And though they were always fine, I was not after. I was tired for work the next day. I wasn't able to like be a present parent. And there's always like this trade-off and like this payoff. And all this to say is like not only other students, but clients will appreciate your boundaries as well. The right ones, the ones that are aligned with you for sure. I don't know if that's been your experience with it, but yeah.
Absolutely. And it's important to be able to address when you've overscheduled. But what ends up happening is the more you work with your boundaries, the better you plan your week. And even if you feel you're going to be okay, especially with the things you can't predict, that's funny to say as a psychic, but things like children being sick or, a car breaking down or an elderly parent needs assistance. I know I've had to fly back a couple of times from sick or elderly parents that are hospitalized. There are unexpected things that do take place where we have to reschedule. I had a series of electrical outages that were completely out of my control. So these are things that just happen. But when you start scheduling your schedules lighter, it becomes less of a liability. And there are always going to be these issues that no matter how well planned you are, they will come up. And that's such a valid point that you brought up, is to be honest with your client and to really share that you don't feel you have the bandwidth to give them a proper session. And it's also very important for for clients to understand the level of preparation that we put into before doing a psychic reading, especially from a remote space. You're dialing into that person's name. I do a bunch of, automatic writing. There's cleansing of the space. There's honoring the ancestors. There's probably like 2 hours of preparation for me personally that goes in. So I hold a lot of integrity and space holding prior to the session's beginning. So there's a lot of bandwidth going in prior to the session even connecting, even before you get onto that Zoom call.
Yeah.
So it's important that you have that amount of energy and bandwidth to share with that client to be in the integrity necessary to give the top quality reading that that client deserves.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, and I think that's something for people to consider. I mean, I'm dying to talk to you about pricing and stuff. We didn't talk about going down here, but this all kind of takes effect into that, and that's something that you always help, guide me through as well, and we support each other with that. But it's not just the 45 minutes in front of the client or the hour in front of a client, right? It's like the years of development. I know when I do mediumship, the lifestyle changes quite a bit for me as well. Like the things I'm consuming days before, I don't mean just ingesting, I mean, even mentally consuming can impact my connection. Right. And so it is definitely like a lifestyle doing this work. And so I really appreciate everything you just said around that. I want to go to pricing here in a second, but and I want to go to ethics and integrity. I mean, there's so many places I want to go with this. Where was my next thought though? Oh, yes. I wanted to highlight your accuracy before we move down there because you did talk about, sometimes you prep for some time and I'm not just like fluffing your feathers. Like you have told me things that have been so specific down to the number of people that will come into something I'm offering. You're like, "Oh, you'll get 33." I'm at like 4. I'm like, "There's no way." And of course, you get 33 exactly. Your level of accuracy is pretty mind-blowing. And I wanted to read this testimonial that's on your website and kind of talk about that because it could very well be your natural ability and it could be the devotion you have to your prep and to the lifestyle that supports you and your work. I was going through your testimonials, and there's this great one here that I feel like I could have written myself. But it says, honestly, I thought I was getting punked. Maxine didn't even look at me as she was doing the reading, so she couldn't see my natural reaction or anything whatsoever. Yet she was able to pinpoint literally everything that's going on in my life to a T. Another reason why I thought I was being punked is because I saw another local psychic and she said the exact same thing. She's so detailed about it, it's insane. It's scary in a sense where you realize the spiritual world actually exists. Like it's crazy. I don't know what to say. And what's the best thing about her is that she doesn't heavily influence you in your life decisions after a session. Some psychics might push their predictions on you, but she doesn't, which felt very comforting that I could still create my own destiny kind of thing. The other thing is that you don't sugarcoat. So I know like you're humble in the way where you don't I've never heard you even in our personal spaces like I'm such an accurate psychic or I'm such a but that's something I've always heard about you. And now hearing you talk about the prep and the care and the integrity that you really really lead from like you live it, you breathe it. I don't really have a question around this other than, were you born with this kind of accuracy? Do you think this accuracy and like this spiritual output is based off of how much you put into it? Like what do you think around it?
Oh, that's a good question. I do know that I come from a long lineage. I don't actually know how far back. I've done some past life work around, all kinds of things, like being burnt at the stake and things like that. So there was a lot of hesitancy in this life for me to even endeavor in this kind of work. I was not a willing psychic medium at all. It took me 20 years to even, I was told by every psychic, you're going to do this work, you're going to be well known for it. And it didn't resonate because I wanted to be taken seriously in this incarnation. So first off, I was very hesitant to be involved. And then I decided if I'm going to be involved, I'm going to do it in the most integral way I know to be. And so I read everything you can get your hands on. And I mean, keep in mind, this is the early 2000s. I mean, it's not, now it's trendy, it's ubiquitous. you can go to a, gift shop and you can find Palo Santo wood. Back in 2004, that wasn't the case. You had to go to metaphysical, spiritual, new age stores to learn about this stuff. So it's just been a collection of education and personal teachings, of course, learning, and of course, going into the metaphysical space, whether it be, meditation, and of course, making all kinds of mistakes along the way and learning from them and then adapting that. There is no perfection. It's also important to mention that this work, I really struggle with taking the credit because it's like worshiping the Federal Express person showing up at your door with a package. I mean, nobody worships Federal Express. Most of the time we complain about them and how slow they are to deliver the package. So I see myself more as a messenger, as a service person, but it's my spiritual team that really does all the heavy lifting. And the fact that I have such a clear channel for them is an absolute gift. It's a privilege. And I always say that I think a lot of it has to do with 16 years of professional experience of being a practicing psychic medium has something to do with it. If you go to the gym, several days a week for years and years, you're going to build up muscle, you're going to build up endurance, and it's the same in the spiritual practice. So to answer your question, I think there is maybe some natural ability through the family lineage, and also it's practice, practice, practice.
Yeah. I love that. I absolutely love that. And, you remind me of, who I consider my spiritual teacher, Caroline Mace, in a lot of ways. Just your undoubting, like you're just so in belief of the connection. I've never seen you kind of like waver on that. I think for me, it was harder I think my path of development has been one of like believing in myself. That's been my healing journey when it comes to this. And so, for me, I learned to believe in the spirit world a lot quicker than I could believe in my capacity to be a voice on their behalf. And so my healing journey and my development has been one of like deep rooted like self-belief. And I always admire people who I'm like, you just have like this energy of like true belief like in yourself in the practice, and that really does translate. And I hear Caroline Mace talk about that with her medical intuition. She's like, I never doubted, not even for a second did I doubt that this was moving through me. And I always really admire that. Do you feel that's true for you?
I think sometimes I, to this day, don't understand how it all works. But 16 years of experience and feedback tells a story that, hey, you do this thing and apparently you do it well. So there are plenty of things that I can be self-conscious about in this light, just like everybody else. We all have our fears. But one thing I know to be true is that I'm a good psychic channel. I'm a very good psychic channel. And it's really that it's not about myself. It's that I don't doubt them. I do not doubt my spiritual team. When I've traveled abroad and I've been in danger, they have told me. They've also told me when I can take risks, and there have been tremendous rewards. So when you can literally put your life in the hands of your own spiritual team and know that you are safe, that for me has become the antithesis for the trust. It's automatic now. And someone will say, I think this is dangerous. I said, if it's dangerous, I will know it's dangerous and I will make sure to get us out of here. But it's allowed me to take risks in my personal life and also in spiritual practice, because when you know that ability to just be there and you trust it with your life, you're not going to question it. But I promise you, there are other things in my life that I do question and that I'm working on, just like everybody else. But this is just one of the things I know to be true of myself.
Yeah, and I think your career is very evidential of the support you have from your spirit team. I mean, you're well known undoubtedly, but you're one of those people. When I use you as an example in my business programs, I'm like, there's some people that the work just speaks for itself. There doesn't need to be a fancy podcast or a YouTube channel or a ton of content being put out there to allow yourself to be visible. That works for a lot of people, but you've never really needed that in your career because the quality of your sessions have created just this ripple effect of referral after referral after referral. So you get to show up when you want on Instagram, like you do reels kind of when you want, but for you, I mean, you're the only light worker I know that doesn't really have like a podcast or a YouTube channel or like a platform. You've never needed it. Is it fair to say that?
It's fair to say that, but thank goodness because I'm not really good at self promotion.
Mm.
Uh, I don't, I have to really force myself to do, channeled reels for weekly prediction. I'm notoriously inconsistent. Um, and that, of course, plays into if there's a lot of messages coming through, I share and I'll share with the community. But if I'm not going to share anything. Or if I'm moving countries or if I'm in South America and the connection's bad, you may not hear from me.
Yeah.
Or maybe you'll just get a reel with penguins in Patagonia instead. So I can be a little inconsistent with all of that. I also toggle with valuing my privacy as well. So there's kind of some different things going on, but I'm not a big fan of being in front of the camera. So that is, part of, I guess, maybe some of my own insecurities, but it's also part of lifestyle design that I don't want to be working 24/7 to promote services. I truly believe in the metaphysical marketing aspect is that if you are any good at what you do, the work should speak for itself.
Yeah.
And that
100%.
but there's nothing wrong with having a podcast and broadcasting yourself out to the world and being the light that the world absolutely needs because that needs to be celebrated as well.
Yeah. No, I love it. And I love your path the way it is because I love that there's an example out there of someone who is booked and busy and in demand and all those things and doesn't need all that because I know I personally, and I'm sure a lot of healers feel like this too. It's like we're forced into this ecosystem and this like landscape of like getting content out there and being content creators, and that's something I've personally struggled with for the past few years. It feels like there's a lot of like anchors everywhere and I'm like I just want to be free. Like the way that you do it just feels so free. Um yeah, and that's what I love about it. And I love that there's a really solid example out there of someone who could be wildly successful without having to push out a ton of content for people. Anyways, my brain's going in a million places now. So to stay on track here, I wanted to touch on because, I feel like we need to have a whole separate podcast episode on this altogether, but you've mentioned two words that definitely connect us in value, which is around that integrity and ethics when it comes to this space. I know that that's something we are both incredibly passionate about, and we really do have invigorating conversations around this topic, usually from me coming from a wounded space, and you bringing in, like, the wisdom and, I really like that, but something that we're both passionate about. So, what do you wanna talk about with this? Where do we go? How detailed do we wanna go here? But why is this so why do you have such a passion for this part of the work?
It is a huge, huge passion, and I have it divided because I gave it some thought prior to the conversation that we're having now. And for me, I think the hesitancy to even be involved in this industry had a lot to do with the fact that there's no regulation whatsoever. So people can go out there and call themselves whatever they want to call themselves, and it will be accepted in, the internet world or, the metasphere, so to speak. So there are three aspects, if you don't mind, that I'd love to address and get your feedback on, Danielle, because again, you are so integral as well, and you're such an incredible teacher and leader in the industry. And one of the areas that I feel is a bit of a hot button is spiritual appropriation. And an example could be if someone is calling themselves a shaman or a guru, or even maybe using traditional indigenous practice without the proper training, without their lineage, or, and there's that's very sensitive. When we're starting to use this terminology with people not really understanding what that entails exactly or the years and years of trainings that shamans go under that's intergenerational and there's different kinds of shamanism and and then the second piece is the forced ascension, we call it, and that's when I was living in Mexico, you can see a lot of young people taking psilocybin or ayahuasca to really speed up their ascension process. And I mean, it can very much do those things. But next thing you know, there's, a young person, facilitating these types of ceremonies with virtually no experience behind them. So this is where we can run into dangerous territory. And by the way, that's not to say there's a very integral, beautiful people doing this work. So this is not everybody, but it is something that I saw very often in Mexico. In fact, we had a term for them. We call them the Tuluminati because they would, come out and they would want to align your chakras and heal, your sexuality. And it was all kinds of practices taking place with literally no integrity or validity behind the work itself. And finally, the toxic coaching culture.
Oh,
That itself can be pretty big topic, but I just want to distill it. And I should also mention that I am a master coach. I've been one for many, many years, and I understand the connotation attached to that. When you say you're a life coach, people can not help but roll their eyes to your face. And quite frankly, I don't blame them. And the reason for this is there are many amazing, valid coaches out there offering amazing programs and services. However, the ones that I have been witnessing as of late are not selling a program to serve and help others. They are promoting a lifestyle. They say, hey, look at me. I'm making 8 figures. This could be you too. Hey, look at my Instagram. I'm in a private jet. Hey, look at me in my 20 houses or whatever the thing may be. And then people become, oh, wow, look at everything they have. And I want that too. They must be doing something right. So it's no longer about being of service or integrity, but it's about selling a lifestyle. So that is obviously completely separate than integral service.
yeah. Oh, so much I want to talk about in this. Thank you for bringing these up. And again, we're going to have a whole conversation, podcast episode on ethics around this because you're right. It is an unregulated industry, which has its beauties to it, but it also has its like drawbacks. I think about my naturopathic doctor clients or even like massage therapist clients who are kind of fixed under a governing board that tells them like they're not allowed to channel, but they're allowed to, work with like it just feels like too restrictive. I don't know if I could be a clear channel under that, but also we do need to have some sort of standard or some sort of agreement. I think if we can all just start on like do no harm, right? Or even if we do cause harm, get trained up on how to repair if we get caught in that situation. I think that's really important and it can come with some experience as well. The interesting thing about the cultural appropriation, appreciation conversation. I took my first shamanic immersion experience in 2017, 2016, actually, it was. And I took it under a Celtic shamanic practitioner, which I didn't know what to think of at first because I'm First Nations. I also do have Scottish heritage as well, which I was kind of, considering myself under. But the way that she approached it, I really appreciated. And I took this with me with my teaching. She said, I am talking about this from a Celtic lens because that is my ancestry. What is your ancestry? And do some research, do the work to connect in with your own lineage, with your own line. And that to me was really empowering. And I really appreciated the openness of this teacher with that. And that's something that I too also, preempt a lot of my teachings I bring in. Like, look at your lines, look at your culture. And I think a lot of the sickness we have in our society is a lack of a connection to culture. I think a lot of us can heal through connecting with our ancestral lines, no matter where that comes from. Shamanism crosses all cultures in some regard or another. So there's no real need, especially in the example of shamanism, to take on an indigenous, or South American kind of shamanic practice, which is what I see too. In truth, even with the Sacred Spirit Retreat, I've had a hard time getting indigenous teachers in there because they are so afraid of participants coming in and taking those teachings and taking them back and, extracting them essentially. And so it's very hard for me to find Indigenous teachers to come speak to non-Indigenous audiences. So at the retreat, I simply say, these teachings are not to be retaught by you. I think some of the best way that we can remedy this is creating spaces for people to tune into their own lines and their own lineages. So it's kind of like leading by example. As somebody who considers themselves as a reconnecting Indigenous person, I didn't get to grow up in my community because my grandmother went to residential school. None of us got to. And so I was blessed to get to spend 10 years working for my people being taught a lot, but I don't have permission to share those teachings. And the teachings I do have permission to share, I will with that context. And I think that, energy doesn't lie. And I think that there is good energy and like not great energy. And I think that we have to be in congruence with the energy we want to bring in. And this should be at the forefront of how we choose to show up and what we choose to kind of teach. I will say that that congruence I can feel, and I'm sure you can too. You can feel it when somebody is presenting like a psilocybin experience in Costa Rica, and it's like you're not connected in those lands. You're not connected into that culture. You can feel the incongruence, right? And that's kind of like my internal radar. And because I can see that out there in the world, I can feel it so clearly in with mine. So, it's a big topic. It's a big topic. I know there's some examples out there of teachers who have renamed their communities, like Cal Gray, Angel Tribe. He had Angel Tribe, and it came out through 2020s that that could be some appropriation. And so he changed it to Angel Team. So there's some examples out there, I think, of people becoming more sensitive to this. But any questions you have beyond that, that's my take on it. I think that there is a great way to tap in and learn about other people's culture with the right context, that these are not for you to take and to teach on. It's like it should get you curious about your own culture because we all have one.
Absolutely. And then to add to that piece, if someone's wondering, well, then who the heck do I trust as a teacher? You can be asking, well, what is your spiritual lineage? What is your background? Like, what is your training? What is your teaching? And I think that's such a wonderful piece that you just connected is to discover your own lineage. Go deeper, go further, and find out what your lineage is, where you come from. I've got a background that's Welsh and English and Serbian and French and Irish and Scottish and about probably 20 other different, backgrounds. But there's a lot of mostly predominantly French and Irish in there. So I will get sometimes some Celtic guides, like actual druids that will come in spirit sometimes when I was doing Reiki practice. Like I wasn't even dialed into the druid. They came to me. And so it's really interesting. And then I've had nuns come in, and my mom was raised very strict Roman Catholic from Montreal. And I've had nuns come in and speak to me. So it's really interesting how our teachers can not always be of this realm, but they will come forward and a lot of times will say, what the heck was that? And then realize, oh, wait, I have a lineage connected to the druids and I have a lineage connected to the nuns.
Yeah.
And so understanding that lineage and going deeper will empower you. And it will also, you may have some unexplained connection to psilocybin and going to Costa Rica, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you want to ask questions. What's your lineage? What's your training? And if they're not able to appropriately answer those questions, trust and dial into your own intuition to decode or decipher if you want to move forward or not.
Absolutely. I agree with that. And connecting on that culture piece, I have permission to share this story, by the way. I asked the direct person that I have permission to have this permission to share this story, but my brother struggled with a heroin addiction since he was 13. In some ways he's still, 25 years later, like working through some of that. But there was a 2-year stint where he, for the first time, got to go live in community and go into a healing house. And every day connecting with the land, connecting with other men in the circle, doing sweat lodges and river cleanses. And it was actually through that connection to culture that he was able to get clean for 2 years. I mean, 15 years into his addiction, it was heavy. And so that was a big eye opener for me that like, yeah, connection to something like culture can really help someone heal. And so this is not just like a forewarning, like it's like, don't appropriate other people's culture. It's like, no, if you actually do that work to connect in with your own lines, there's a healing that can take place that, can't be done from outside of yourself. So it's a worthy exploration for yourself. Because I know everyone who's attracted to spirit school definitely is of ethics and integrity for the most part. Like they wouldn't be drawn to this if they weren't. But if you've ever questioned, like, is it right that I do this practice? Or, if you've ever kind of questioned that, my answer is always to like go back to your line. So thank you for reflecting that back and jamming with me on that a little bit. Um, the second part that you asked about was around that ascension, that speedy ascension. I've never thought about it like that. It's great that you word it like that because I did a recent podcast interview where I was being interviewed on someone else's podcast. And I've always considered my path to be really slow and steady when, I developed for 4 years before I served publicly. I served publicly, for years before I've built a spirit school. Like everything seems to be on like 4-year kind of cycles with me. It takes me 4 years to like move and like do shit. On the outside, I know it looks fast, but I personally has always been drawn to teachers who were much older than me. And so with that, I never really felt like I was in a rush of any kind. I never felt because I had so many examples of people in their 70s and 80s and heck, one even in their 90s that were still doing this work. So at 30, I was like, what's the rush? I'm like, I'm going to be doing this till like I'm 90. So I've never felt that, but I could see that being an impetus for people to want to go be one, like ego death. I mean, I've done a couple myself to help my PMDD in the past, but I do notice that people do it a lot. And you're right, it probably is that kind of quick ascension, like you
Yeah,
say.
the fourth my guides coined it forced ascension. And, when the Kundalini energy rises too quickly, most of us know in spiritual practice that that could lead to psychosis. It could lead to, really unruly behavior, or you can just be raising your vibration too quickly. Because if your consciousness is not ready for the physical ascension, you're going to run into a disconnection between the two.
Yeah.
Or you feel that there's too much energy. It's like, being in a 40-watt socket and punching in a 200-watt bulb. It's
Yeah.
not going to work. And that's where, when it comes to taking plant-based medicines, this can be a very worthwhile, healing, amazing, fulfilling journey that is going to serve so many incredible people. But if you are forcing it or jumping ahead or using it to get more psychic or to get more insight or to heal faster, that's when it becomes dangerous. So it's important to really decipher the two, because if you're making informed decisions, researching properly where you're going to do plant-based medicines, you understand their history, you understand their training, their lineage, and you feel personally connected intuitively, then and you really want that experience, then from a conscious plane, you're probably ready. But
Yeah.
if you're approaching it from a trendy space of, oh, look, everyone's doing psilocybin and I happen to be living in Mexico where they do it, I should go do that too. That's when we can run into potential issues.
Yeah. And again, what helps one person heal is not going to help the other person heal. It's kind of like the cold dips were so jarring to my nervous system, but, like, everyone was doing cold dips, and it was, like, one of the most uncomfortable things for my physical body I could have done. I'm like, "How does anyone find this healing?" And, it's not healing is not one size fits all, and I don't think that there are any shortcuts in this work. I think following your intuition will definitely keep you on a path forward. Maybe ignoring your intuition might delay you a little bit, but I don't think that there's, like, spiritual shortcuts that we can take, you know what I
That's the
mean?
point. That's the whole point. When we're talking about an unregulated industry, if we want to distill it down, there are no shortcuts. You just go in and use Earth as the classroom, learn the lessons, and just be really humble and just lead by where you feel guided.
Absolutely, absolutely. Very, very energizing, and when I teach about my path and I'm like, I took a leap to go full time, I do it with the clarity that, like, I had a double income here. I had a husband, I had a life partner. This was not like the biggest blind leap. Like I had a bit of a safety net there, acknowledging some of that privilege to make sure that the people who are investing in it know that if it's accessible or not.
Talking about toxic coaching cultures, it's unfortunate that there are some what could be known as leaders in this industry. We're talking people making 8 or 9 figures. We're discussing people that have, the shiny, bright website. They say, look at me, we've sold this many, which they probably have. And they're not necessarily selling how they can serve or help. They're selling a lifestyle. So when you look at their website, they're showing you their 8 or 9 figure life. They're showing you, hey, this could be yours too if you sign up to this program. And it sounds like what your experience was is you thought, oh, this person might be doing something right. You sign on to the what, $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 program and realize, wow, all I got were 2 live calls and a bunch of pre-recorded sessions. And I feel a bit ripped off, or I feel a bit duped, and there's no refunds made available to me, or I just feel like I was sold something, but the experience didn't match the energy that you were presenting.
Yeah.
So that seems to be, and again, if you're drawn to a certain coach that happens to be an influencer, we're not suggesting they're all bad, but again, how does your energy feel? Are you excited? Or have you taken a few of their free programs and were excited or impressed by the content? Then by all means, go ahead. But we're talking about people that are not necessarily selling to be of service to you. They're selling to, purely, they're selling a lifestyle that they're hoping you're going to want to have as well.
Yeah.
And we can get into a whole thing with MLM with that. I mean, this is not a new marketing scheme, but it's important as spiritual people that operate from an unregulated industry. We are looking to learn from other people, and we're more apt and quick to jump on that bandwagon than maybe others because we want the validation of the teaching. And that all we're saying is that not all teachings are served in the same integrity. So use your intuition and do your homework. Check reviews. Make sure that and if you unequivocally feel dialed in to wanting to work with that person, then by all means go ahead. But understand that there is a lot of smoke and mirrors, and 2020 has been dismantling that quite a bit. And I think that the netizens are getting very sophisticated and not falling necessarily for these schemes. So, that's good to know.
It is, and I appreciate you opening up this conversation because I always share from, like, my lived experience, but, I ran the calling in 2020, 2021, like, around spiritual business, and then I did not touch it again because I started to doubt if you can actually teach business because I never took anything that was, like, truly, truly hopeful, I think is kind of the word that I would wanna use, and so I was like, "I don't know if you can actually teach this," and I didn't do business for quite a few years, but it was actually Maxine who constantly, "You need to teach business, you need to teach business," like, people need I was like and I don't think we ever talked about why it didn't feel a fit for me, and I think it was because I didn't have any real examples of great experiences that I've had. Then I started to question my own, am I offering a great experience because of I don't have any big promises around this, and I just started teaching business again this year, and it was actually my mastermind, it was the only one that people really wanted to continue to fill. So I am teaching business now thanks to your encouragement.
I would think that you're such a natural when it comes to the business community. And I think that by being so conscious of the ethics and understanding your lineage and working through all of the healing and all of the lessons in life basically is you're the perfect person to indoctrinate other people or to lead them in some way in business and also in mediumship. And you are an absolute champion and you're at the top of your game in this industry. And it's important that your audience knows that you are top tier. And if the people that do not, then don't worry about their integrity, that don't ask themselves these kinds of questions that you need to be concerned about.
Yeah.
And so we have to allow ourselves to become more visible in the ways that we feel called to. So it sounds like that offering an offering called The Calling was very, very accurate.
Yeah, it was. And, one thing that I learned through the ethics and integrity around my experiences was there are no big promises. I can't promise you any major breakthroughs. And that's one of the hardest things when you're asking people to invest their time. But I love teaching it and I love giving people like a leg up, or if I can save you a few lessons, like let's do this kind of thing. But I am very honest with people who come into my spaces. I'm like, this is a responsive container, right? And so what you bring in is what we will bring out, because I don't think that there is one single pathway that can replicate success, right? Because we all have very different 100%. We all have very different access. We have different privileges that we kind of walk in with, and so we can't replicate everything. And that was my hardest thing about it. Even like different mediumship, like the initiation. I don't teach mediumship in a 10-step process or one singular pathway. I was like, here's how it works for me. Here's a playground for you to play. How does it work for you? Bring back the lesson. Like, let's share, let's huddle on this, right? And I think that that can kind of normalize things, and just make it more real. Right? Just make
You
it more
you
real.
built such a fantastic container to allow your students to continue from beginners to, a mastermind level. And it's just something that I'm continuously talking to you about is the business piece. I mean, that is your natural, area. You're a natural teacher and you're great on the business side and you're a fantastic medium. And, I think the areas that we share in common have to do with being in integrity and constantly questioning that. You can't just think you're in integrity. You're questioning that every step of the way and saying, how can I improve? How can I be better? And there's going to be ways through lifestyle, through health, through how you live your life, how you raise your children, what country you decide to live in, and how you embody your own spiritual practice that will all bleed into those teachings.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I want to say if anyone, we're already at an hour and 20 minutes. I'm going to have to let you go soon here. And I don't want to take up too much. I could talk to you forever, but if you want more on this topic, because this is something I've never talked about publicly, and it's just kind of like behind backroom conversations we have, like me and Maxine, who I trust her integrity. I trust everything about you, to be honest with you. And we've been friends for quite a few years now. But if you want to hear more on this topic, please let me know, because I'm happy to have Maxine back and we are happy to drill down even more on this. I would trust no one else to have this kind of deep conversation with. But yeah, in saying that, we've covered a lot of different ground today. I'm curious. I know you've gone through some major, major life and lifestyle changes in the past 2 years since we have met. And it's always beautiful in friendship how we're able to like share that balance of holding space for one another. It just so happens when you're struggling, I'm not. When I'm struggling, you're not. I'm like, here we are. Isn't that a beautiful friendship? And we can hold space for one another. But curious about like what's next for Maxine? What's your next like goal, or what are you going to be doing next? How can people find you? And any like final advice for our listeners who are, up and coming intuitives and light workers? I leave the last few minutes to you.
Well, thank you so much, Danielle, for having me on here. I think that new intuitives need to better trust their path, that they're far more powerful than they ever will ever know about themselves. And it's great to have teachers along the way, but it's important that the intuitives understand their power on their own and listening to that voice that goes within. And that's going to guide you to the great teachers and the coaches, because there are fantastic people out there in the world that are really here to share and to serve in the best and most integral ways possible. And that's important to, leave you with that not everybody is smoke and mirrors, that there's so many wonderful people out there in the world. And, I'm going to continue offering one-on-one sessions. I do have a course that is going to be connected around free will design. So you can stay tuned for that, most likely in the fall. And I tend to just allow a small amount of students. Most of them are live-led courses. So if you feel drawn to that, you can always find me at MaxineFriend.com.
Thank you, Maxine, so much. It was such a joy to have one of my besties come on the podcast for the first of many times, I'm sure. Go check out the links below if you want to follow Maxine on Instagram or check out her website and offerings. A joy to get to spend this afternoon with you, Maxine. And we'll see you next time on Spirit School. Did you know that Spirit School is not just a podcast? It's an actual school. If you go to myspiritschool.com, you can invest in self-study courses, live programs, and of course the Spirit School Collective, my baby, my monthly membership community. All Spirit School offerings are intended to get you feeling clear, confident, and connected to your spiritual path, your development journey, and of course, connected to other spiritual curious souls who are having similar experiences to you. I hope to see you in Spirit School.